The night was quiet and the wind moved softly through the trees as she walked along the old path, her steps light like whispers in forgotten dreams. There was something in her eyes that carried the weight of untold stories, the kind that live between heartbeats and only silence dares to touch. She had always felt that someone or something followed her, not in fear but in a strange gentle way, as if a presence watched her, not to harm but to protect. She could never see it clearly, but she felt it always just behind her, shadow stretching longer when the moon rose above the fields. It was not her own, she knew it the way one knows the warmth of sunlight without looking. The shadow followed her even when there was no light, even when the candle burned low and her eyes closed to sleep. Sometimes she would wake in the middle of the night to the faint sound of her name like a sigh carried by the wind, and she would smile, not afraid but comforted. She would whisper back softly, "I know you are there," and the air around her would still as if the unseen listener nodded in silence. As the days passed, her life moved like a slow melody. She lived alone in the house her mother had left her by the river. The walls were old and the windows framed the sunset like a painting. Each evening she would sit by the window, her hands resting on the old wooden table, the light of the setting sun spilling over her hair the color of burnt gold, and she would think of the times she had felt someone near, someone unseen, watching her with quiet affection. She never told anyone about it, for who would believe that a shadow could love her? But deep in her heart she knew that love did not always need form or face, it only needed feeling, and she felt it stronger than anything she had known. There were nights when the rain would fall endlessly and she would watch it trace paths down the glass. She would whisper stories to the empty room, stories of lost moments and dreams that never came true, and each time she spoke the candle flickered as if someone listened, and each time she smiled her heart felt a warmth that had no source except the silent watcher near her. She began to write letters. She never sent letters to the shadow she could not name. She wrote of her fears, of her longing, of the loneliness that stayed even in the light of morning. She left those letters on the windowsill, and by dawn they were gone, only a faint scent of rain left behind. One day she walked to the river where the mist hung low over the water and the air smelled of earth and memory. She stood there, her eyes closed, the sound of flowing water blending with her heartbeat. She spoke aloud to the silence that had become her closest companion. She said, "If you are real, then let me feel you once. Let me know that the love I feel is not madness." The wind stirred, and for a moment she felt a touch on her hand, so light, so fleeting that it could have been imagined, but she knew it was not. Tears slipped from her eyes, but she smiled, for she understood that love can exist even in shadows. And as she turned to walk home, the sky broke open with the first light of dawn, and for the first time she saw it faintly beside her on the wet ground, another shadow walking with hers, the two shapes merging softly as if they had always been. And days turned into weeks, and the girl began to notice little things that others would never see: the way the leaves outside her window moved when there was no wind, the way the candle would burn slower when she read aloud from her favorite book, and how sometimes she could hear soft footsteps behind her, but never close enough to startle, only near enough to remind her that she was not alone. She began to speak to the shadow as if it were a friend, as if her words could cross the distance between light and darkness. She would say things like, "You know, I never thought love could be quiet and still mean so much," or sometimes she would whisper, "I think I would be lost without you," and the silence would respond with warmth around her heart. The villagers who passed her cottage often wondered why she smiled at the empty air, or why she walked by the river alone at dusk, her eyes shining as if she was seeing something beautiful that they could not see. They whispered stories about her, that she was strange or touched by spirits, but she paid no mind, for the truth of her heart was something she kept sacred and unseen. One night when the moon was full, she woke from a dream, her heart racing. She had seen a figure in the dream, tall and pale, standing at the edge of her bed, looking down at her with eyes that held all the sorrow of the world and yet all the love too. She reached out, but before she could touch the figure it faded, and she woke with tears on her cheeks. The days that followed were filled with a kind of ache she could not explain. She missed something she had never fully known, and each evening she sat by the river waiting, hoping for a sign. Then one evening, as the sun sank low and painted the water with gold, she saw a shimmer across the surface like a reflection that was not her own. It moved closer until she could see the faint outline of a man beside her, yet when she turned there was nothing but air. Her breath caught, she closed her eyes and whispered, "Are you here?" and the wind replied with a soft sigh that brushed her hair aside. She felt it then, a warmth at her back, a pulse of quiet affection, and she whispered, "I can feel you." From that night onward the connection between them grew stronger. She no longer feared the dark, for it was his world, and within it she found peace. She began to dream more often, dreams of another time where she walked through gardens of silver light and someone held her hand. Though she could never see his face, she would wake each morning with the faint feeling of lips brushing her forehead and the echo of a voice saying, "You are not alone." She started leaving the windows open at night so the shadow could move freely through the moonlight. She would sit on the floor beside the old wooden chair, the candle flickering beside her, and she would tell stories of her life, her childhood, her hopes, her pain. The room felt alive, as if the walls listened, as if the air itself held her words. She spoke of love that the world could not understand, a love without body or boundary, and each time she said his name, though she did not know it, the shadow grew clearer on the walls, as if responding to her heart's call. One night the candle went out, though there was no wind, and she felt a sudden stillness, heavy and deep. She whispered, "Please do not go," and a hand unseen brushed her tears away. The moment was so full of emotion that she could hardly breathe. She leaned forward, her eyes closed, and for the briefest second she felt the warmth of another's lips touch hers, not in passion but in promise, a promise made by a shadow that loved her beyond time and light. The nights grew longer and the connection between them deeper. She no longer wondered if it was real, for every heartbeat whispered his presence and every sigh of wind carried his love. She began to feel him not just behind her but within her, in the rhythm of her breath, in the quiet flutter of her pulse. She would walk through the empty halls of her house and the shadow would move with her, around her, as if the walls themselves had grown alive with his care. She laughed sometimes at the thought that love could be so silent yet so consuming. She remembered the first time she had truly felt his warmth. She had been crying by the river, the rain soaking through her hair and clothes, and for a moment she thought she was utterly alone. Then a wave of comfort had washed over her, a weightless presence that held her together. When she looked up she could see nothing, but the air shimmered, and in that shimmer she felt the shadow fold around her like a blanket of light, though no light existed, and she whispered, "Thank you," and the wind answered softly, "You are never alone." Seasons changed and still he followed her faithfully, his form always just out of reach but always felt. His presence grew stronger as if he fed on her love and her trust. She began to speak to him of her fears of growing old and dying, of the loneliness that sometimes crept into her heart. She told him all the things she could not tell another human being, and each time she did she felt him wrap around her like the most tender embrace, a promise that he would never leave, that he would remain with her long after the world forgot her name. One night the moon rose full and silver and the air was still. She walked to the river and the shadow appeared beside her more clearly than ever, the outline of a figure tall and gentle, the edges soft as mist. She reached out her hand and though it passed through the form she could feel the warmth, stronger than fire, stronger than the sun on her skin. She whispered, "I love you," and a voice not her own whispered back, "Always, I have always loved you." And in that moment the stars above seemed to bow down to witness their silent devotion. Years passed and the world outside continued without pause, but she remained in her quiet life with the shadow who loved her. Every morning she woke to the faint brush of presence beside her. Every evening she walked by the river and felt his silent support beneath the moonlight, and she knew that love could take many forms, some seen, some unseen, but all eternal. She would smile to herself and whisper to the night, "Thank you for loving me," and the wind would carry her words to him and he would linger there in every shadow, in every quiet moment, loving her still. And when the time came that her body grew frail and the world grew dim, she felt no fear, for she knew he would not leave her. The shadow who had loved her from the very beginning would carry her beyond the boundaries of light and dark. Together they would walk into the endless silence, hand in hand, her heart beating with his presence until the very last breath. And when she closed her eyes forever, she did not feel the end but only a continuation, a love that had always existed in the spaces between shadows and light, a love that spoke louder than any voice, a love that would never die.